find me today in the centre of Birmingham, and I'm going to be making a series of videos which I think I shall call story time. In this instance, the story is that of the Birmingham Canal Navigations. Now, the Birmingham Canal Navigations are currently 100 miles of canals. They used to be 160 miles until the cultural vandalism of the 50s, 60s and 70s. So, as you can imagine, in a relatively small area, they are incredibly convoluted, and they go around and above and below and tangle up with each other, and there's loads of different canals and loads of different branches and loads of different names. So it takes quite some untangling. And the history of the BCN, Birmingham Canal Navigations, is equally convoluted and challenging. So given that there are a plethora of dates and names and all sorts, I'm going to keep it relatively simple and be deliberately slightly vague about specific dates and not mention too many people. There are some excellent histories out there if you want to get the fine detail, but this is a broad brush story. So to begin at the beginning, I suppose it's worth just saying why there is a reason for there to be a canal network in this area of the country. Birmingham is on the edge of an area which, from the mid-19th century onwards, came to be known as the Black Country. It's not normally assumed to be actually part of the Black Country. And it was called the Black Country, I guess, for two reasons. One, because there was a lot of coal very near the surface to relatively shallow down. And two, because once you start digging that coal out and you start with the process of industrialization, the whole area quickly turns black. Now, the surrounding area was owned by a relatively small number of extremely rich people, as you would imagine would be the case. So, also, the coal is relatively near to the surface. So instead of having one or two very large coal mines, like you might find in areas of Wales or the north of England, there were literally hundreds of small collieries, each employing, only a few dozen people at the most. And these quickly sprang up in the 1730s, 40s. And coal is, of course, useful. But the roads to Birmingham from the Black Country were horrendous. They were appallingly rutted, they were slow, it was obviously horse-drawn carts, and it was a real challenge to get the coal anywhere. So, into the picture comes a group of people called the Lunar Society. The Lunar Society were a group of mostly rich, mostly industrial men, exclusively men, which included, amongst other people, Erasmus Darwin and also Matthew Boulton, he of Boulton and Watt steam engines, his partner being James Watt, inventor of that particular type of steam engine. And it was Matthew Boulton who first proposed the idea of this, the Birmingham Canal, in 1768, I want to say. And in those days, in order to build a canal, you had to have an Act of Parliament, so you could compulsively purchase the land and what have you. And by 1770, they had started building and got it up and running. Now, in order to do this, they got the man who had just recently built all sorts of other successful canals, not least the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, which is to the west of here, up in Wolverhampton, or at least it goes past Wolverhampton and Otterley. And they thought it would be a grand idea to build a canal from Otterley into the centre of Birmingham, which is in fact what they ended up doing. But they didn't do that straight away. They started out by building this canal out as far as some more local coalfields 10 miles away. That particular local coalfield rejoiced in the hilarious name of Ball's Hill, and that opened in the early 1770s, and it was an instant and enormous success. to the extent that the price of coal in Birmingham was slashed more or less overnight. Now, Brindley correctly recognised that getting coal to places fast wasn't important, but getting coal to places cheap was important. So he was a big fan of what we now call a contour canal, that is to say a canal which follows the twists and turns of the landscape without attempting to go up and down hills with locks. He didn't entirely succeed. There is a place called Smethwick, not very far from here, where there was a big hill. He tried to dig a tunnel through the hill. He failed because the ground was too soft, and so he had to build a series of locks. I believe originally 6 up to the top, and then 6 back down again at a place called Spon Lane. And some of them still exist today. They actually lowered the summit a little bit later, John Smeaton did, but the summit still exists. And handily, Bolton supplied a Bolton Watt steam engine, 2 of them in fact, to pump the water back up the hill into the Smethwick summit, and so everybody was happy. Hooray! Now, most people think that the Birmingham Canal was built to Gas Street Basin. However, that wasn't originally the case. The Birmingham Canal was and is full of little things like the thing you can see in front of me, these little fingers and wharves that stretch off to individual ironworks, coalworks, industry, whatever. And in fact, when we go back there, we'll have a look again, but Gas Street Basin originally did not end there. There are some more fingers, Newhall Wharf and others, but they have long since been filled in and built on, because that's what happened in the 1960s. Nevertheless, original Birmingham Canal was a staggering success. It wasn't long before they completed their next job, which was to build it out as far as Wolverhampton, where it met the newly constructed Staffs and Worcestershire Canal at Otterley Junction. And that was the Birmingham Canal mainline, 22.5 miles of canal built and outrageously successful. However, other people wanted to get in on the act, and other people wanted to build their own canals as a form of competition. So, even by 1770, there were proposals to build a rival canal from Birmingham to Paisley, where it would meet the Coventry Canal, and in fact they wanted to build it out to Walsall as well as a rival route. To counteract this, the Birmingham Canal Company put in their own rival plan to build their own rival canal out as far as Walsall. This was helped by the fact that the part of this canal, the branch which went out to Balls Hill, conveniently was relatively near Walsall. And both rival plans went to Parliament, and because both rival plans were rivals, and because they strongly opposed each other's plans, both bills were defeated, and neither could be built. So the Birmingham and Paisley Canal Company had been set up to build a canal and was now a company with no canal. Relatively quickly they realised that if they worked together, they could work to build more canal and get more money, more trade, more everything. And so Birmingham Canal Company and the Birmingham and Paisley Canal Company merged, bearing in mind that only the Birmingham Canal Company actually had a canal at this point. And I don't know why, but I imagine it's because they didn't want it to look like they had been bought out by the Birmingham and Paisley Canal Company, but they refused to become the sensible name for a canal which was in Birmingham and went to Paisley and just call it the Birmingham and Paisley Canal Company. No, they called it the Birmingham and Paisley Canal Company. And it was like that for a few years, and they built essentially another canal, the Birmingham and Paisley Canal, from Gas Street Basin down through Farmers Locks and out to Fazeley, having convinced the Coventry Canal guys to build themselves the canal as far as Fazeley as well. All is good. But time marches on, and by the 1820s the Birmingham Canal was, shall we say, a challenge. It was a victim of its own success. It wound backwards and forwards everywhere, and it had become shallow, and it had become difficult to navigate, and we have a gate blocking the path here, so we can't walk along here. Except, of course, I have a British Waterways key because I'm a boater, so I can go through the gate. Hooray! So, they brought in another engineer in the 1820s, Thomas Telford. You might even have heard of him. And he was, frankly, he produced a report which was extremely critical of Brindley's canal. Brindley had, by this point, long since died. In fact, he died something like a month or so after the Birmingham Canal was completed. And he decided that canal technology had moved along and that life had moved on, and that it would be much better if, instead of this windy, twisty, turny contour canal, if he employed the new technology of cutting cuttings and building embankments, and he just ploughed a new canal in a totally straight line through all the twists and turns of the Birmingham Canal. And that's what he did. So we are currently on one of the twists and turns of the original canal, which is one of the very small bits of the original canal which is still left. There's not much of it left because quite a lot of what Telford did was to dig out, widen and make better all of the original canal, and essentially obliterate many of the traces of Brindley's canal. And bearing in mind that Brindley's was built in 1770, this is 1820, so it's 50 years later. However, where the canal had its twists and turns, quite often there were companies, iron foundries. In one case, a manufacturer of electric scales. Well, not electric scales, but scales. Avery, they now make electric scales. And so they kind of left all the twists and turns in. And that is where we get the first of our interesting features of the BCN, which is that in central Birmingham, as elsewhere, there are lots and lots of these little twiddles and turns that go pretty much nowhere. They just bimble across and bimble back into the main line again, and it's as if someone's just, I don't know, put in a crescent for no particular reason. Now, this particular chunk of canal is actually relatively short. It turns back and joins the main line in a relatively short distance. So what I will do is I will shut up, and then we will wander around back to the main line. Here's a really good example, by the way, of the sort of thing which happens. You walk round a corner and suddenly the canal just abruptly ends for no particular reason. So I'm going to pop back to the main line and we shall carry on our story then. See you in a minute. And here we are at the end of the little bit of original Brindley Canal, with the Telford Canal coming in to sweep its way through. I'm just going to go up and over this bridge and we can see the sort of combination of the original line of the canal and its replacement with Telford's bigger and better version. Now, bearing in mind we're in the 1820s now, so most of the buildings around here have not survived from that time. So let's try and ignore the 80s red brick and flats and imagine the canal coming around here. There's probably some heavy industry on both sides, okay, and off it goes down in that direction. But Telford built this chunk which cuts off that loop entirely and just goes in a massively straight line. There are two other loops in actual Birmingham centre which still exist. There's a couple which don't, have been sold off and filled in long since. But it's worth having a think about what Telford did. And I know it doesn't look like a great deal of difference, but it really was. The Brindley Canal was shallow, it was relatively narrow, and it had a towpath on one side, which meant that every time boats had to go past each other, somebody had to give way to somebody else, which caused a lot of arguments. Telford's design had a towpath on both sides of the canal. It was basically 2 canals wide. You can see that there's essentially a bridge with a central parapet. It's 2 canals wide, and it meant that traffic could go up and down all day and all night, every day and night, and supply the city of Birmingham with all of the coal that it needed for all of its manufacturing needs, and also carry around parts of that manufactory, tubes, iron ore, that sort of thing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk back along the Telford section back towards Gas Street Basin, and then we will finish this episode there, I think. Now then, I mentioned that Birmingham Canal Company had effectively teamed up with the Birmingham and Paisley Canal Company, and this is the fruits of their labours. To that way lies Gas Street Basin, and to this way, Old Turn Junction, lies Birmingham and Paisley Canal. Now then, we better get used to this. Horsley Ironworks bridges. They do appear elsewhere in the system, but this is the absolute hallmark of the BCN. It's the sheer number of Horsley Ironworks bridges there are on the system. There are some that are missing because in the 80s, when the system was very run down, scrap metal thieves nicked quite a lot of them. But there we go. Right, let's walk down to the top of the Farmers Bridge locks. So here we are at the top of Farmers Bridge locks. This is quite close to where the headquarters of the BCN used to be. Nowadays, this little BCN cottage is the headquarters at Cambrian House. This, on the right hand side, was an arm that went off underneath where those tower blocks are to a wharf. All gone now, of course, since the 1960s. But here we are at Farmers Bridge Lock number 1. This continues all the way down the line to Paisley, sorry. We are not going to walk all the way down there, but suffice to say, it does, in fact, exist. What I'm going to do is go back to Gas Street, and then we will finish up today's episode there. See you in a bit. Gas Street Basin, you can see proof, if proof were needed, that Gas Street Basin was not the original terminus. You can see at the end there a bridge with some wheelie bins in front of it, which is now bricked off, and behind it a modern and not terribly prepossessing building, which is the original site of the end of the canal. But what is interesting here is this. This walkway here is not a modern construction to enable boat owners to get to their boats. It's called the Worcester Bar. And when the Birmingham-Worcester Canal came up to meet the Birmingham Canal on the far side, the Birmingham Canal's reaction was to react by building a massive wall across the basin and preventing the Birmingham-Worcester Canal boats from getting through. So for many years, what you had to do if you wanted to transport goods or transship goods was to moor up side on, where these boats are moored up end on, get another boat, moor it side on the other side, and physically carry the goods across the 1 metre wide wall from one to the other. And presumably having to pay 2 boat companies and 2 canal companies and 2 lots of tolls, and all very silly. Eventually, the pretext was basically they didn't want people from stealing their water. So eventually they came up with a solution, and the solution was this. Here is the bar, and that existed all the way across the canal, including across this bit, from 1795 until 1815, when finally they put in this narrow channel between them. And even then they were concerned about water loss. If you have a look here, you can see where the remains of a lock gate, or the spaces for a lock gate, once was. And again on that end, there's no water level difference at all. Essentially what this is a stop lock. You can shut the gates and stop any of the precious water escaping. Either way, although generally from the Birmingham Canal down into the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. So therefore, from this gate here, we are no longer on the BCN. This is a separate canal owned by a separate company and was never actually part of Birmingham Canal Navigations. Now then, you would have thought that taking 20 years to work out that cooperation is a financially better idea than competition, so that will be the end of it. But in future episodes we will find out that the Birmingham Canal Navigations fought this battle again and again and again and again with different parts of the system. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let future me put in a section where I'll show you a map of where we were up to by the end of this episode, principally the Birmingham Canal's old and new navigations, and then I'll wrap it up. Hello, future King Paramount here. Let's just quickly follow the lines of the canals we were looking at. This is the Birmingham and Fazeley Canal, which starts not unreasonably at Fazeley, joins the Coventry Canal, and it goes all the way down through Curdworth and Minworth until it meets the Birmingham Canal. By the way, here, this is a junction called Salford Junction. We're not interested in these 2 canals just at this moment, and that is underneath Spaghetti Junction. Here are the Farmers Bridge locks that we were looking at today, and that's Gas Street Basin. And here you can see the 2 trunks of the Birmingham Canal, Brindley's windy version and then Telford's version straight through the middle. It gets even more split up over here, where Brindley's canal goes up a hill and then down again and off towards the northern reaches. This was, do you remember I said originally it went to Balls Hill? Balls Hill is here. This canal has long since been cut off, but it went up there. Okay, and then the new canal carries along up here, and the old canal not only went up there to Balls Hill, but it went down here, and then they carry on more or less in parallel. You can tell new from old. Look, old wiggly, new straight. There's various places where they link together, not there, that's where one canal goes over another, before they join back here and go off. This was another loop, of which half of which has been lost and the other half of which hasn't. And we bimble all the way up here to our 21 locks down to Aldersley Junction and the end of the Birmingham Canal. back to current King Paramount. And so there we are, part one of our story time, in which we looked at the Birmingham mainline canal and a couple of the bits that attach to it. In future episodes we're going to look at the northern section of the BCN, going up to reach the coalfields at Cannock and Worley Bank and Anglesey, and in another episode we'll look at the southern reaches going to Dudley, Halesowen and Stourbridge, and then I think we'll have one final wrap-up episode where we look at the decline of the BCN and why, when there used to be 160 miles, there is now only 100 miles left. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I shall see you for the next story time. Goodbye.